Sunna, the first of the idols, is coming out as a physical support, and she has quite a few interesting gimmicks with constant ether veil application, split EX specials, and even an indirect buff to other agents' damage outside of standard buffs. Let's have a quick overview of how she works and her performance, as it turns out she's both very strong and takes a surprisingly healthy approach to character balance. In terms of buffs, Sunna has Angelic Coordination, giving up to 1050 attack and being applied with her first EX special, which costs 70 energy to cast. After using it, she can either pocket or link into a second EX special, which costs no energy and applies Ether Veil Delusion Reprise, giving a rather pitiful 50 attack. While its value is honestly laughable when being run with attack or same faction agents, this Ether Veil also increases enemy stun damage multipliers by 30%. Either way, both of these skills can give a quick assist and count as an EX special cast for buffs, like Moonlight Lullaby, allowing you to either split them up or use it all at once. You notice that when using her second EX special and activating Ether Veil, she gains 2 stacks of Claw Sharpeners, the little cat icons underneath her portrait. Any Ether Veil activation, even those from other characters, will build 2 stacks. She also gets 1 whenever an anomaly is applied, with a 10-second cooldown, and 6 whenever she uses her ultimate, which isn't all that remarkable besides this, giving a quick assist before its heavy attack. There is one thing I didn't mention about her EX special, which is that using it will place Bubblegum, Sunna's kitty friend, on the field, and apply Cat's Gaze to target's hit. While Cat's Gaze is active, doing a certain number of attacks will trigger its effect and consume it. If attackers trigger it, it'll deal 300% attack to the target and those around them, whereas if anomaly agents trigger it, it's 480% attack, being guaranteed to crit, and has 150% more crit damage. If in stun, this effect triggers faster than out of stun. You might think that this might not amount to much given Sunna's stats, but these scale entirely with the triggering agent, and not just the element, but their stats too, which adds up to a pretty significant amount of damage over the course of a run. This is because Cat's Gaze may be applied by EX specials, but also by many other moves, namely Sunna's Chain Attack, Ultimate, and most critically, Bubblegum. It's here that Claw Sharpener stacks come in. If there are no enemies of Cat's Gaze nearby, Bubblegum will consume 1 Claw Sharpener to attack and reapply Cat's Gaze. They'll then stop attacking until it's consumed or it runs out, in which case the cycle begins again. All of this amounts to a very straightforward gameplay loop. Use Sunna's EX1 to apply Angelic Coordination, then her EX2 for Ether Veil Delusion Reprise. This applies Cat's Gaze, puts Bubblegum on field, and triggers Moonlight Lullaby's effect. Whenever Moonlight Lullaby is due to expire, make sure to bring her back in and cast at least her EX1, then pocket her EX2 for later if needed, or use it straight away for Claw Sharpener stacks on Ether Veil reapplication. Other than that, sit on an attacker to continuously trigger Cat's Gaze and make use of Sunna's buff. That's about it really. In practice though, managing her EX casts, especially around Deadly Assault buffs, and character-specific resource management like in Shunguang teams does require some effort. I should point out I've been given very little time for these runs. I'm certain far better scores will be achievable in line. Between coming to terms with her kit, rolling for discs, planning out routes, the opinion I have here is very much a cursory glance at best, so take everything I say with a pinch of salt. But enough yapping, let's look at some runs. Let's do a quick breakdown of the Primordial Nightmare route, because in a Shunguang Dialyn comp, especially against enemies with Miasma Shield, the sheer amount of resources given can actually be difficult to work around. The start demands a swap to Sunna for basic attacks. She does start fights with 15 extra energy, but when her EX special cost is 70, she still needs a few hits in to get enough for an early cast. As her Ether Veil is what's needed for the stun damage multiplier increase, we want it up as soon as possible. Unfortunately, the last set of her basic attack string has very long recovery frames that can't be dash cancelled out of, but thankfully it's still enough time to swap the Dialyn after Sunna's EX2 for a rock, the double basics, scissors, double basics, paper, into Shunguang's ultimate. This is a relatively standard opener, and as standard, it's also not particularly reliable. I tried shifting timing so the ultimate comes earlier or later, yet even still I kept having to restart again and again and again. It's in large part because of this inconsistency that I struggled in having the time to optimize runs. The standard Enlightened Mind State combo follows, but it's genuinely important to use the faster EX variant on the second loop, as time, not resources, is the limiting factor. Once the control skill begins, stay on Shunguang and do a few attacks, both for Sword Force and Decibels, which will come in handy in a bit. For the parry itself, we want 2 parries on Shunguang and to end on her assist follow-up, as again, Decibels are required. This also sets up for an EX special cast to build Sword Force and help shred some Miasma, followed by 2 Dialyn EXs and both of Sunna's EX1 and 2. Which when coupled with the Ether Veil from the opener, is enough to lead to a second Enlightened Mind State. Shunguang should end the combo at almost 3000 decibels, after which we can stall a bit with some basics until Sunna's EX is ready. When it is, Dialyn EX for King of the Summit, and only one Sunna EX. We do not want to use the second. This is only for Moonlight Lullaby refresh and to upkeep the Deadly Assault Ride the Current buff, which demands support EX casts every 20 seconds. This should lead to a quick assist to Shunguang, but I was a little hasty. Either way, it's onto Shunguang's Decibel ultimate for the third Enlightened Mind State. As always, as condensed a combo as it can be, with the daze bar hopefully not being so high as to trigger another Miasma Shield before it ends. Once done, Shunguang should be at just under 3 Sword Force, so a quick EX cast builds the remaining point, and from there it's a rush to the third Miasma Shield state. It can sometimes be possible to fit in a full combo before it, but as it can be rather inconsistent, I found it best to simply push through it quickly. Since we built the third Sword Force for the EX, all we need is another Ether Veil from Sunna for the fourth Enlightened Mind State. If you can get all of Sunna's EX2 to land in Miasma, then Shunguang's entry skill should be enough to shred it, but if not, no worries, there's a lot of damage leniency in this run. I'd recommend using Manual Chain as we want Dialyn's ultimate conversion to not use a Force Chain attack. This also has the benefit of not overlapping stun recounts of Dialyn's spores, which allows us to milk as much of the crit damage increase from the stage buff as possible. As the state is about to end, swap to Sunna for another EX1 only. Again, just for buff management. Then one Dialyn EX should be enough for her ultimate conversion, taking us to the 5th Enlightened Mind State. At this point, it's fine to start triggering chains as they have no more use. With the time left in stun, it's possible to use Sunna's EX2 to pre-build 3 Sword Force via her Ether Veil, get Shunguang's EX special to benefit from the stun damage multiplier, and, most importantly, cycle through Dialyn's EX specials without building any days, making sure only paper is landing out of stun. This is very important as Sunna and Dialyn both build a lot of days, which can offset Miasma Shield timings. With plenty of energy on Sunna, we can EX1 and 2 on her to get Shunguang the Sword Force needed for the 6th Enlightened Mind State. As soon as it's done, if Sunna has energy for an EX, it's good to swap to her for an EX1 only, otherwise go straight to Dialyn to build enough positive reviews for an ultimate conversion. Primordial Nightmare will be looking to go into Miasma Shield, but the interrupt from Shunguang's 7th Enlightened Mind State ultimate does buy some time. Ride the Current may be running out by the very end if Sunna EX1 wasn't used, but that isn't too big a deal given the Miasma Shield. Here is another RNG checkpoint. Often Primordial Nightmare will fly up into the air and take a long while before doing parable attacks, so if this happens, swapping to Sunna for an EX1 and 2 so as to pre-build Sword Force is useful. If, like in this run, you get lucky though, prioritize getting as many parries as possible to shred Miasma, making use of Dialyn's ultimate and then Shunguang's EX to close things off, with the added bonus of building Sword Force and not overcapping on energy by doing so. You can use Sunna's ultimate as well, but it's very slow and she's in no need of Claw Sharpener stacks on this comp. With the energy recovery from the Miasma Shield break, another Sunna EX1 and 2 is all that it takes to get the 8th Enlightened Mind State. Although, ideally don't do as I did here and make sure to use Dialyn's EX before this so as to refresh King of the Summit. Condensed combo as usual, then once it's done, it should, again, be a swap to Dialyn for her EX so as to refresh King of the Summit, then Sunna for her EX1 to keep up Moonlight Lullaby and Ride the Current. Use Shunguang's Decibel ultimate, then combo as normal, and do not swap to Dialyn halfway through. The reason I did so was that I could at the very least have King of the Summit up for Shunguang's ultimate finisher, but doing this only uses up precious time. As a consolation prize, I did set up for Shunguang EX and stun, which we need for the 3rd Sword Force stack. Not the stun, just the EX. This is then followed by 3 Dialyn EX specials as we want as much positive reviews as possible in addition to King of the Summit. Then lastly, Sunna's EX2 for the 10th Enlightened Mind State. Chains can be skipped in full here so long as there is no overlapping stun recalcs, as we want to milk as much time as possible out of the stun to sustain the stage buff. Ideally it'd come a little later, but my earlier Dialyn swap moved everything forwards. Once done, a single Dialyn EX should be enough to get her ultimate conversion ready, leading us to the final 11th Enlightened Mind State in the fight. At this point, it's overkill, especially if stun comes later than it did in this run so as to get the full crit damage bonus from the stage buff. There's so much resource generation here with Dialyn and Sunna combined that the problem isn't getting Enlightened Mind States, it's having the time to use them. There's some potential optimizations that can be done too. Instead of shredding the post-first stun Miasma Shield quickly, it may be better to hold on to Dialyn's ultimate and let Primordial Nightmare exit and re-enter it later, which will give an extra 20% crit damage. Even with the 36 substats I have currently, Dialyn's signature engine is kind of overkill. I'm sure that with the 40 plus subs Shunguangs I've seen around, Primordial Nightmare will be going down without it. What can I say? Everything about this comp flows together perfectly. Sunna's raw buff value is good, but nothing all that outstanding, especially when compared to Astra. That is, of course, if you don't factor in her constant Ether Veil generation and the 30% stun damage multiplier bonus. For most characters, especially those that can do out of stun damage, this is a limiting factor, but not a Shunguang who gets the benefit from said multiplier at all times. With most bosses having 150% stun damage multiplier baselines, this leads to a perfect 210% total when paired with Dialyn's Malicious Complaint. It also pairs up well with Cat's Gaze. It only triggers when attack or anomaly agents are hitting enemies, which can cause alignment issues on teams that don't on-field attack as much. Shunguang though is always attacking, which means that she's constantly triggering Cat's Gaze. As every Enlightened Mind State is also an Ether Veil activation, that also means Sunna never runs out of Claw Sharpener stacks. And really, Sunna's Ether Veil generation is no joke. She may not get energy regen from her core passive, but with her signature engine, ER on D6 and ER 2Ps, she's getting another EX every 22 seconds. This means it's laughably easy to get 11 Enlightened Mind States in a fight. On Primordial Nightmare, even that is partially limited by having to work around Miasma Shred. On a fight like Unknown Corruption Complex, or even one like Miasma Priest or Brute Forcing, getting 12 Enlightened Mind States is definitely on the table. And unlike Zhao, whose generation is fixed with a hard cooldown on how quickly her gauge can build, you can always make use of basics and energy recovery mechanics, like Miasma Shield, to speed things up further. While Zhao does also benefit from the latter, one EX special on Sunna is one Ether Veil, where it'd take a good 5 EX specials on Zhao for the same. Not like Sunna is a Zhao competitor, after all, they can work together. Pompey is not a miasma boss, but I picked it for the showcase to highlight some of the limitations that come with running both when there isn't any miasma shield to supply energy recovery. The run was quite hurried with fewer than 10 attempts made. I'm pretty sure there was some good routing and making use of Zhao parries and Shunguang chain attacks to maintain weakening stacks. This dies relatively easily. Except that, well, Dialyn does kill this very easily. It didn't take 10 attempts, it took 1. If Pompey hadn't touched out of attacks on the last Enlightened Mind State, it'd have died with almost 20 seconds to spare. Whereas a Zhao Sunna team does need some modicum of thought to play well. I found that Zhao just couldn't keep up with Dialyn in terms of Sword Force generation. She's getting, 5 Ether Veils in a fight? That's around 15 Sword Force stacks. Dialyn though is doing at the very least 3 ultimate conversions, even without miasma energy recovery bonuses, amounting to 18 Sword Force stacks. Not to mention the extra damage that comes from ultimate activation. The Zhao Sunna comp is also somewhat awkward to play and can struggle with set effect maintenance. Both Zhao and Sunna quick assist forwards, which makes it annoying to swap between characters. Having 2 agents that can quick assist does make it much easier to maintain Astral Voice stacks, which Zhao would be running, but even then that demand efficient split use of Sunna's EX1 and 2. Problem is, her EX2 takes a very long time to cast and has a small hitbox, so it frequently misses entirely against mobile enemies, leading to no quick assist prompt and no Astral Voice activation. I personally haven't done the math myself for the raw buff value that Zhao provides when compared to Dialyn, but do keep in mind the high levels of saturation that come with both Zhao and Sunna on the same team. And of course, there's Zhao's own Ether Veil management, which one needs a watchful eye for. Ideally, it should stay up in full for all of Shunguang's Enlightened Mind states, and doing so can make the comp even more stressful to manage. Don't think I'm hating on the rabbit though, quite the opposite. I actually find this comp performs incredibly well. Dialyn Sunna is the strongest general combination for Shunguang, but as soon as enemies have high base stun damage multipliers, it can struggle comparatively. 60% in stun damage multiplier bonus quickly becomes 10%, limiting the encounters in which the comp is best for. In such cases, Zhao Sunna is likely to outcompete. I haven't had much of a chance to try routing fights where this is the case, with the only one available in rotation being the throw, which does favor Dialyn somewhat, owing to self-sacrifice's crit damage taken increase on stun, but I wouldn't be surprised to see competitive scores for both team variations. Honestly, I'd fully expect Marinette or Typhon to favor Zhao. I'd be interested in seeing how the team performs against Unknown Corruption Complex as well, with leg breaks making Dialyn's Sword Force generation not be as big of a deciding factor. With how on-demand Dialyn is for pretty much every single non-anomaly comp in this game, Sunna can work as an effective replacement for her without too much sacrifice on scores. In fact, Sunna can work as an Astral replacement as well, if looking at attacker teams more generally. As with the Zhao Pompey run, this was quite rushed. I did consider grinding out a route, but like, I'm not even kidding. This was happening every other run. I really can't be asked. Even still, I think it can set the scene for how Sunna does outside of your Shunguang teams, because how good she is or isn't ends up being quite nuanced. As mentioned before, Sunna's raw buff value really isn't all that outstanding. Compared to a character like Astra, who provides 1200 attack as well as 20% damage on 25% crit damage, the 1100 attack from Sunna isn't all that impressive. Sunna's Wenjin is very strong with 25% damage and 10% combat attack, but when you factor in even an A-rank Wenjin like Kaboom the Cannon on Astra, she's an outright better buffer than Sunna is, all the while giving more frequent quick assists and chain attacks of her ultimate. The only edge Sunna has over Astra in buffs is a stun damage multiplier, which comes to deal a lot of out-of-stun damage like SAnby or Seed don't benefit from as much. And those that do, like Soldier 11 or Evelyn, really want Astra's chain attacks, be it for decibels or for their own mechanics. At the very least, the SAnby team does get the benefit of triggering Cat's Gaze frequently, but does so out of stun, which means it itself does not benefit from the stun damage multiplier gain either. To be honest, even in stun, the internal cooldown on Bubblegum is so high that it's not that big a deal. To be fair, Cat's Gaze is meaningfully contributing to damage regardless. 300% in damage multiplier, 25 to 30 times in a fight, it does add up. And unlike Astra, whose damage is her own, this all scales with the triggering agent. Perhaps more important than damage though is daze. Astra is notoriously bad at this, with her tremolos and tonal clusters having no daze buildup whatsoever. Sunna, on the other hand, gets quite a bit from her EX specials, of which she gets to cast very frequently if you happen to have her signature Wenjin on hand. In fact, she gets even more daze by splitting her EX 1 and 2, which is genuinely helpful. Honestly, it was to the point where even with attack percent D6 on trigger, the few SAnby runs I did often had me cycle through stuns far too quickly as a result. That's not a bad thing, mind you, as the daze is very much appreciated. So Sunna can be competitive. Except that then you remember running her without a stunner means fewer opportunities to benefit from her stun damage multiplier gain. The extra daze is great and all, but it's rough work for her to outcompete Astra in a dual damage team like any Seed or Orphe comp, or dual support teams like Mono Ether Zhuyuan. So Sunna is not all that straightforward as an Astra replacement. Nekomata wants Astra as Sunna isn't going to supply quick assists every 6 seconds, and the chain conversions are useful to pad out stun. Soldier 11 prefers Astra, owing to her revamp alive for enhanced basic 5s after chain attacks. Same to Evelyn and Anton both, who are tied at the hip to her. As for others, it depends. Seed would perform better with Astra, but SAnby, if running Trigger, can do just fine. Problem is, that means not running Orphe, so not ideal. Coron and Billy, I suppose, could go both ways. Astra's ability to reposition for back attacks is huge for them, and they can sometimes struggle to fill stun without Astra's chain conversions, but a Dialyn Sunna team could match up owing to the high stun burst and monophysical anomaly buildup making up for decibel losses. Ellen is already massively saturated on crit damage anyways, and assuming she has the resources to burst every stun, Sunna would more than hold her own. Harumasa, if anything, is one I think Sunna would do really well in. Note that I can't show you any of his potentials just yet, so this is all based on his current iteration rather than post-revamps, but it's hard enough as it is to find time and stun for all of his dash attacks. Astra's chain conversions don't meaningfully add all that much to him. He's quite crit damage saturated as is, and almost all of his burst is in stun, so it can work out. All in all, Sunna is a godlike pick for Shunguang, massively streamlining her rotations and giving her more options, with the potential to free up Dialyn for other teams. Unfortunately, she has no use in Rupture or Anomaly teams, and even in Attacker 1 she's at best a side grade to Astra, and I'd say that's a good thing. Coming from Dialyn's release, who unabashedly power crept every single Sunna before her, even in their niches, having a character that has teams they're best suited for but is still competitive outside of them is a breath of fresh air. Considering that Cat's Gaze does get triggered with Anomaly agents though, it's clear as day that she's going to be useful for Arya. So if you are interested in seeing runs with her, want to learn about niche tech, or even just fundamental game mechanics, why not like, share, subscribe, and ring the bell? I've got more videos coming. Thank you all for watching, and I'll see you next time.